Good day, everybody. My name is Piotr Zbyk, and I work at the Greater Sudbury Public Library. And I'm here today to introduce to you a brand new music segment that's called Music Side Chat in partnership with the City of Lakes Music Society. So, this is our very first episode, and we want to welcome everyone who's tuning in today on our Facebook page. You'll be able to catch these excellent segments on our social media. And so, today we'll be talking about Shakespeare, and more specifically, scoring Shakespeare. So, our friends at the City of Lakes Music Society are going to help us answer this question. Composers have often turned to the works of Shakespeare as a source of inspiration or creative material. How have composers evoked, captured, or recreated the moods of Shakespeare plays through music over the years and since he has lived? So, we have two super awesome guests that are going to answer this for us from the City of Lakes Music Society. Please welcome Charlene and Jamie as they answer this very interesting question. So, please welcome them and have a listen.
A surprisingly large number of composers have tried their hand at writing operas on Shakespeare plays, and some of the finer examples have been written by Rossini, Benjamin Britten, Thomas Adès, and Otto Nicolai. But in the canon of the great Shakespeare operas, I personally feel those written by Giuseppe Verdi stand out for their psychological insight and humanity. Verdi tackled three of Shakespeare's plays. The first, Macbeth, was written in 1847 when he was only 34 years old, but already on his way to becoming a star. Macbeth contains what is, for me, one of the most moving choruses in all of opera, Patria Oppressa, in English, My Oppressed Country. The chorus here is a group of war refugees, and you can hear their plodding footsteps in the orchestra as they keep moving while exhausted, hungry, and frightened. Verdi is using this chorus to comment on the political oppression of his native Italy, a country constantly fought over and carved up by France and by the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was a very clever way of getting his point across under the noses of the censors, who had previously forced Verdi to rewrite music that they considered to be too politically sensitive. This opera is not all doom and gloom, however. The Witches' chorus is really great fun. You can tell Verdi was enjoying himself. And there is also a terrific duet between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, as well as a spooky and dramatic banquet scene. Verdi returned to Shakespeare as a much older man. Othello was composed 40 years after Macbeth, when he was already 74 years old. At this point, he hadn't composed an opera in 16 years, and this work is quite a departure from his previous operas. First of all, he creates a sense of the early 17th century Venice by incorporating some rather unusual offstage instruments: an organ, mandolins, guitars, and, wait for it, bagpipes. Secondly, he eliminated recitatives. For those of you who aren't familiar with that term, I should explain that recitatives are extended passages of rapidly sung, lightly accompanied words that move the plot lines of the stories along. Recitative has been a standard for more than 200 years, so this is quite a significant change. Also gone are the showstopper arias that bring the drama and acting side of things to a screeching halt. Instead, the music flows seamlessly from one scene into the next without break. Othello, again, shows Verdi's insight into the psychology of his character, and he demonstrates this in his use of musical motives that reflect their natures and situations. One example of this is the insertion of a credo for Iago something that is hinted at, but not totally fleshed out in Shakespeare's play. It is inserted following scenes where Iago presents himself as an all-round good guy, but the words and the music reveal to us everything we need to know about this villain. And here is a little bit of that credo. I believe in a cruel God who created me like himself. I was born from the cowardice of a seed or of a vile Adam. I am a son of evil because I am a man. Yes, this is my faith. The evil I think and proceeds from me fulfills my destiny. I think the honest man is a mockery and that everything in him is a lie. After all his foolishness comes death. And then what? And then? Death is nothingness and heaven is an old wives' tale. With each of these phrases, the pitch of the music rises, beginning on E flat, with the next phrase E natural, the next phrase F, indicating his agitation. His voice rises just as our voices rise as we get excited about things. And Verdi is not afraid to make this music sound harsh and even a little ugly because it suits the drama. Another add-on in this play and this opera is the Ave Maria sung by Desdemona before she retires to bed. The heartfelt simplicity in this is truly moving, especially since the composer has already indicated to us that Desdemona fears that she will die by Othello's hand. The orchestration is very light. The soprano sings softly and prayerfully throughout, and the music just peters away to nothing as she sleepily goes to bed. This is followed by the arrival of Othello, and from the music, you can tell he is moving stealthily, and he is getting ready to murder his wife. But when he looks at her as she sleeps, he remembers his love for her. There was earlier in the opera presented a love theme, a kiss theme, and we hear it again as he leans over her. Verdi's very final opera is Falstaff. It's not only his last Shakespeare, but his very last opera. It was written in 1893 when he was 80 years old, or perhaps I should say 80 years young, because the music sparkles with all the youthful exuberance and generous humor of the original, and he follows the play exactly. It is one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's such a good question. I mean, composers have been going to the well of Shakespeare's plays for a very long time to draw creative inspiration and ideas. And sometimes it's as straightforward as just taking the text from a portion of a play or from one of his sonnets or other poetry and setting that as lyrics to music or adapting it to operatic form. I'm thinking of the Italian composer Giuseppe Verdi, who was a great lover of Shakespeare's and wrote several operas based on Shakespearean plays. Macbeth, Othello are good examples. But also composers who were interested in exploring more of the mood, more of the character through their music. The characters in Shakespeare's plays, but the character and the mood of the plays themselves. Richard Strauss also did an adaptation of Macbeth, a tone poem rather than an opera, and a great example of how he was able to evoke the mood and the character of that play was to to write bits of music that sort of sounded evocative of Scotland, little bits of what sound like bagpipes in the woodwinds here and there. This also the sort of very heavy rhythmic motif that appears once in a while or throughout actually the tone poem. So great examples of how composers have taken the ideas in Shakespeare and adapted them in symphonic form. But in terms of the evolution, I think that the way composers have treated Shakespeare's material has evolved the same way that the way maybe other directors, play directors, for instance, or even movie directors have taken Shakespeare's material and ran with it over the years. We see modern adaptations of Shakespeare all the time, and composers, as music itself has modernized and as the instruments and the technology available for composers and musicians have also modernized over the years, of course they're making use of that to bring Shakespeare to life, I guess. One of my favorite examples is actually from the soundtrack to a movie called Prospero's Books. But the soundtrack is by Michael Nyman, and it's a really evocative soundscape that he creates using some traditional orchestral instruments, but also some non-traditional instruments. One of my favorite examples would be a piece called Caliban's Pit. So that the character Caliban from The Tempest, this sort of cave-dwelling, doer, hunchbacked figure, right? So Nyman writes this really heavy sort of jazz, very staccato saxophone motif, or very bassy saxophone. And it's this really sort of low, growly kind of sound, very hard driving rhythm, which is sort of a really great take on that character. So it captures the idea of the character really well. A little bit the narrative there as well, in terms of exploring that character's maybe personality and how they would interact with other people, but captures the mood of the movie, I think, or of the play, excuse me, and adapts that for the movie really well. So if you haven't heard that soundtrack, I encourage you to check it out. Actually, it's he's considered a minimalist composer. I don't know if that's necessarily accurate. I think his music is actually very colorful and very evocative. It is very rhythmic, very motivic, but I kind of enjoy it for that. Another great example from that would be Miranda, the character Miranda from The Tempest, which is another sort of great, sort of always rising melody and chord progression, it just sounds fun. I really enjoy it. Yeah, I mean, Shakespeare's tragedies tend to be a pretty good source of artistic creative material for composers. I mean, there's certainly been many adaptations of the tragic side of Shakespeare's writings. I mean, Romeo and Juliet is probably the best known. Tchaikovsky's tone poem based on Romeo and Juliet. Prokofiev, Russian composer Prokofiev, he wrote a fantastic score for a ballet based on Romeo and Juliet. In fact, it is probably safe to say it's one of his masterpieces, one of his best known masterpieces. So popular, in fact, that several orchestral suites have been put together with movements or selections from the score from the ballet. And they're very well known and very popular. The music is just incredible. And I suppose that's a good example of how composers have taken the idea of just taking Shakespeare and setting it to music and ran with it. That idea has evolved a little bit. I mean, you can capture the mood of a play easily enough by putting it into operatic form. But ballet is a whole other kind of art form that requires a different kind of language to try and get mood across, mood and character. So, Prokofiev's score for that ballet was such an inspiration, I think, for the choreographers, and you can hear the mood captured so effectively from the play in that score. Verdi, of course, great composer of serious, I suppose you could use the word serious, music, tragic music. A lot of his operas tended to be tragedies. So it made sense for him to take, operas like Othello and Macbeth. Those deal with some pretty dark subject matter, and they go to some pretty dark places, and both have pretty tragic endings. So Verdi, of course, did his thing with those, and made them, masterpieces unto themselves, his operas at least. But Verdi could also do comedy. One of his other well-known operas is based on the character of Falstaff. His opera is Falstaff. It's quite funny the way that he treats that character and takes the material from the play around the character of Falstaff to sort of round out that trio of operas, the two tragedies and then this very lighthearted comedy. And other composers have taken Shakespeare's comedies and ran with them too. A great example is a composer who's not well known, maybe as well known. His name is Otto Nicolai, and he wrote an opera based on The Merry Wives of Windsor, which is another of Mr. Shakespeare's comedies. And it doesn't get performed all that much, but the overture actually from that opera does get performed frequently enough. It's quite charming. It's easy to sort of peg composers as taking the really heavy, serious stuff and using that as a basis for their composition. But actually, it's an equally skillful task, I think, or displays composer's skill as well to show just the light side of Shakespeare and to show how adept they are at capturing the happy and the joyous and the ridiculous that exists in Shakespeare, alongside with the tragic and the serious and the insightful. I think the way that composers have and will continue to take ideas from Shakespeare or take Shakespeare's words or characters or narratives, I think the way that has evolved will still be the way that it does evolve. And to me, it sort of aligns with the way that other art forms have taken Shakespeare and adapted it. We certainly still see a lot of modern adaptations of Shakespearean plays, made to fit the time, made to fit maybe events that are happening, current events, a way to capture the zeitgeist, perhaps. There are plenty of play directors and choreographers and writers who are taking Shakespeare's ideas and continually reinventing them for the modern age. I think that composers have always done the same thing and will continue to do the same thing, not just with Shakespeare, but with everything. I mean, composers, as with other creative artists, they take what they see around them and reinterpret it for the benefit of the rest of us, to try and make sense of the human condition, of the way we interact with each other, the way our society is going, even right down to some of the people who have shaped some of the major events of our time. So, Shakespeare was doing that kind of stuff in his day. Composers have done that kind of stuff ever since his day, and they will continue to do so. So for me, the evolution of Shakespeare and music will simply mirror the way Shakespeare has evolved, or the way that other creative artists have interpreted Shakespeare over the years, and how that has evolved. And that's a good thing. I mean, it's never going to get stale. The ideas that Shakespeare explores are so fundamental to the human condition, and he seems to capture that so well. I think that it's really just a matter of taking those ideas, those thoughts, finding new ways to illustrate them or to share them with people, to illuminate them. And I think composers are perfectly suited to do that. So I would look forward to see what's coming up in terms of people's interaction with Shakespeare and the musical ideas that they come up with based on his work.